Alright everybody, this is going to be a video to discuss the settings and the use of environment fog to help control the idea of depth in your composition. One of the things we're trying to do all the time is kind of simulate a little bit of reality and to give us a sense of, moodiness to a scene, a sense of, again, depth. The environment goes on and on and on. Maybe it's used to hide things in our composition. Maybe there's some things we want to just kind of imply exist in the background. And one of the things that you can use is what's called environment fog. Now, we've already talked about depth of field being a way to take your scene and add the ability for the camera to focus at different distances. If you haven't seen that, and you're not familiar with that, go ahead and you can watch that depth of field video. But this is something else, and some of these things we haven't yet discussed, but I think they're helpful for creating and evoking a mood within a scene. But it does take some experimentation and some working with all the settings. So the first thing you're going to want to have is a scene setup that you can actually see things in, and you're going to need your render settings. Your render settings are going to pop up. It's this little icon right here that brings up your render settings, and you're going to want to see a rendered image. So I have a scene here that I have rendered out. This is the same scene I used for my depth of field demonstration. Why I have it set up is that you can see something that's far or close, middle, and far, and you can see kind of the details on the floor, and we can kind of judge distance when things are getting blurry farther away, and kind of see where things are coming and encroaching in and out. So we have a ground plane then that kind of ends right back here, and then this is just infinite kind of blank or alpha, and so the edge of the plane is here. So when we're working with this environment fog, it's going to try to create the sense of like fog that you would see if you go outside. The other day I was outside and I looked over a baseball field and there was a fog over the ground, and you can see the thickness of the fog, you can see how it tapers away, and the farther away it is from you, the more fog you have to look through, and the more dense the fog gets. As it raises up, I could see I could see where the cloud of fog kind of settled right there over the baseball field, and I could see where its thickest points were and where it tapers off, and I can begin to see the sky and the sun coming up and those kind of things, and the treetops. But there was definitely a cloud over the field. I could see that as I was on the outside of it, I could see how it got thicker and thicker and thicker. And you can simulate these kind of things, but it takes a lot of doing. So here I have this scene set up, and the one thing I have to do is I have to actually turn on environment fog. So I'm going to be using two things. I'm going to be using what's called my hyper shade. It's under my rendering settings called hyper shade, and it looks like this. It's my hyper shade window. It's going to have to deal with it has the ability to tell me the different textures I have in my scene. So these are the textures I have on my cubes. These are how they're being generated and how they're being the file maps that I'm using. And it also has the tabs to show me the different images I have in my scene, or the different lights I have in my scene. So I have different lights. Notice they're illuminating here, and I have an area light over the top of my scene illuminating it, so I can get things the way that I want. And it tells me all this information. It also tells me how I have things. For instance, if I selected an object and I went up here and I said graph it, it'll tell me what the object material is and the different images I'm using to define like a bump map or a color channel that's going into the color of my material. We'll talk more about that later on. You don't have to worry about that so much yet. But one thing you're going to want to be able to do is change some settings or activate the node. These are basically nodal information. And so what I have to do is I'm going to go into my render settings. Again, that's under, it's over this icon here, or it's under Window, Rendering, and Render Settings. When you bring that up, you're going to get a little panel like this. there's two different tabs, a common tab, which I can use to adjust different sizes. I'm using the HD 540, and then the Maya software tab, which I can use to turn on ray tracing and a lot of other things. I'm going to be pulling down my little side scroller here until I see an area called post-processing. And in post-processing, I'm going to click this little checkbox here, and that's going to map. And notice that I'm going to get something. I'm going to get something over here. In just a second, I'm going to clear this. I'm going to clear my graph. And when I check this, it's going to bring up some new tabs. I have an environment light and I have an environment fog material. If I notice in my scene, I have this little light here. I'm going to go to a different view just so you can see it a little easier. And there is a point light or an environment light right. Oops. I'm going to turn off, take that off. And right in here, I'm going to hide this. Control H, hide that. I'm having trouble getting home. There it is. So there, right here. So here is this. Here's this node. So if I map what's happening here, I have an environment fog, and that is going to have a list of attributes. The attributes allow me to control color, the saturation distance, and some other things that I'm interested in are the clipping planes. And I'm going to start with some of these attributes. Some of the things that's important to note, I can bring up these things by clicking on these icons and setting some things, and also by clicking on this little ring here, this little icon. Now, one of the first things I see is that when I click on this little icon here, I'm looking at this from the side, looking at this from the front. I can see here it is. And I'm going to just move it up so I can see it a little bit better. Now, if I was to go back to the camera that I was working from here, and if I was to render this scene out, you're going to notice that it's putting a white haze on everything now. So instantly, it's trying to calculate this kind of fog. And this is kind of like what I was seeing whenever I was going for a walk one day. I had kind of, wherever I was, I looked into the density of the fog, and then I could see this cloud out here in the distance. And before default, that might be just fine. If I wanted to change some things, just simply, I could turn down the intensity of this. I'm going to bring up my render window here. I'm going to bring this down over in this corner so you can see this a little bit better. I can change the intensity values here right off. So if I wanted to do 75%, you can see that it changes the level of intensity of that fog. It's not quite as intense now, and even that gives a sense of environment that we didn't have a minute ago. If I wanted to change the coloring of the fog, let's say I wanted to give it kind of a hazy green color, like if it was smog or something kind of unhealthy, I could give it kind of a green haze, which will be added to my scene. And you can see I'm kind of looking through some toxic gas. If I wanted it to be more of a morning, give it a warmer color, something with a little bit more warmth to it, maybe beams of light, sun is coming through. I could certainly do that, and it would give me a warmer color, this sort of a warmer feel. If I wanted to give it a cool color, obviously I can just change my attributes here, and I can then change those and get a cooler, bluer color. Maybe I'm inside a cloud or something like that. Now those things are just simply by adjusting the intensity values of the whole thing. The more intense I get, the more intense the feeling is going to be of that fog. So right off the bat, there are some things you can balance out and to kind of get a feel for right off with just these settings. And so that's something maybe you can get by with But if you want to go a little bit deeper and look at some of the other attributes that you're going to get here, you can. So what we have to do is I'm going to go into my hypershading, select my environment fog node. Now notice that I got to that by selecting the icon here and going into my hypershading, clicking on this graph, the network. So I have my tab for the environment fog here. Now one of the things that I can choose to change is what's called the saturation distance. Now this is where things become obscured because of the density of the fog. Right now the saturation distance is at 100. So it's actually behind, so it's behind this cube right here and this cube. So let's say this is the first cube, the closest one, this is the farthest one. So the fog is behind this one. If I bring the fog in front of that one, like so, then it's going to obscure that block. It becomes the density where things become saturated or engulfed in the fog. And so if I wanted to decrease the saturation distance from the camera or from my location to try to engulf this, I can do so by reducing the amount of distance that's involved in saturation. It may not completely engulf it, but it might. So you can see that now my saturation values, and if I increased my intensity of it, that might also increase some more. So if I bring it closer and closer or have a smaller and smaller value, that sense of closeness or density is going to increase. So as the fog is, you don't have to see very far into the fog for it to obscure the objects. If I put a greater value here, let's say 500, it will perhaps feel a little bit farther away in the distance from where we were. So we have a setting of 200. This feels like it's much farther from my object. So I can use that saturation distance to give me a nice feeling of saturation to where the object becomes obscured at a certain distance. Another thing that is really interesting about this is how Maya is calculating things like height. And so if we were to think about this fog having a starting point at 0 and a certain height value, and we also have things like a near value and a far value where we can bring things in and have from wherever the location is farther or closer. But I'm going to look at this height value here. Maya will not crash on me. I'm going to try to make this not crash. Okay, so I want to go through some of these settings now for you to get a feel for some of these basic ideas. So to try to adjust the values of the height and the distance and all that, there's some things we got to look at. So if I click on my node here, you're going to notice that I have color, which we've talked about a little bit. I can give it a nice color of some sort. It's going to change the color values, and if I go in and I select the icon, I can tone down the intensity values. I like about 60% or so, or 6%, however you want to look at it, something like so. And I want to avoid like a big wall of color. I don't want it to be super harsh. So in order to do that, I'm going to look at some of these values. Now the first one I want to look at is the use height checkbox. So I'm going to, without that, I can't control as much as I want, and maybe you don't need to do it, but I like to have control over as much as I can, just so I know that Maya isn't doing it for me necessarily, or I don't know how to control it. So I want to adjust. See the difference? This is kind of an even flow here. This was without use height, and this is with use height with some blending. So let's look at this not from this point of view, but from the side camera point of view. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to grab my side view, or I'm going to look at it from the front, and I'm going to render the front view camera. Because what I want you to see is this band. Notice this band here. This is the height. This is the height of this this object. So I need to bring up. I need to go back into my. I'm gonna get my hyper shade back up. I minimized it here, so I can control these nodes. So there's a lot of control. There's a lot of things we gotta. I'm gonna select this to bring these attributes up, and this is the use height attribute. Minimum height is 0, meaning it's going to be at the world edge here. If I turn off this blend, you'll see that it's not blending the top and the bottom. It's just a hard band of color. So I'm going to just I'm going to use my tools here that I know of, my camera tools, so that you can see a few things. I'm going to re-render this. So I want to have control of how high this, if I don't use this, then it's just going to fill the entire space, I think, with fog. If I use height, it's going to minimize it to a value, and it's going up 20 units from 0. The minimum height could be 1 or 5 or whatever, so I have a height of, so 1 unit off the grid, so I'm going to raise it 5 units off the grid, and so watch what's going to happen. The fog is now starting at this point. This is the minimum height, so I could have it hovering above something if I wanted to. Well, the fog that I'm trying to do starts at the ground, so I want to be 0. But if I want this fog to raise up a certain distance, let's say that box is 3 and I wanted to just hover at the top of the box, I can do that. The blending option lets me blend the two, and it softens things a little bit. Now, as I blend this, depending on how high it is, it's based on its height. Obviously, I can't blend past where it exists. So if I blend about 1.5, it's going to soften that. So I get this nice radial, soft highlight that stays within the boundary. So it's softening in and up, back. I'm going to raise my height up to about 20 or so, and if I do that, I still get a little bit of blending, but I'm going to blend it maybe about 15 and see what I get. I expect it to soften in a little bit, so I get these bands. The most dense region is in the middle, and the softer edges are there. Now I'm going to go higher. I'm going to go to 30 and see what I get. See if Maya, so I'm softening it even more. So I'm going to have this soft little band here of fog. Now I'm going to go back to my render, my cam, and if I render that, I can see this. I'm getting this softness. It might be too high, notice that. So if I want to try to bring this down, I'm going to adjust my height, maximum height. Maybe it's only about 15 or so. And I'm going to just kind of see what I get really quickly. Maybe I'm going to bring it down even more. Maybe it's 8. But I can kind of see the change in tone there. There. So here's where I can control how high it is, and then the blend. So if I want to reduce that blend down a little bit, I can start to blend from the height, and I can start to blend things. So you can see how you can start to get this real sense of control. If I adjust my saturation distance, I can change that to go deeper into the scene. Maybe I wanted to go much deeper into the scene. If I have it go deeper into the scene, I'm going to have to look through, I can look through much farther depth of saturation before it goes out of sight. Or I can bring it farther and closer to the camera, let's say 3 units. And if it's closer to the camera, it's going to be up closer to where my camera is, and I'm going to have to see through. It's going to desaturate, or it's going to saturate and become much more saturated the farther away it is. Now with my cameras here, I have a little bit of depth of field on them, so it's going to calculate a sense of blurriness. If you don't know about depth of field, then you're going to need to watch the video. So the depth of field is focusing on this part, and it's blurring the things in front of it and behind it. But it's given me this sense of saturation here. So if I went down to a saturation distance of 0.5, it's going to pull that fog, hopefully, a little bit closer to me, fill up the screen a little bit more. Feels like it's right on top of where we are. Now, and I would recommend experimenting around with what these values do, because I haven't calculated every single value, and I'm learning a lot too as I do it every time. So I can get this saturation way, 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 way down. I don't know how far I can go. 0.01, and I can compare that. And then if I increase the intensity, those kind of things. So there's just a lot of things that I can do. If I want to bring down my max height to a lower level, oops. Yeah, there's where the top of the fog goes. And it can cause some trouble because I can see that this didn't render properly. But I may bring down my blending option and see what I get there. Now it looks like there's some strange things happening there, so I'm going to take that back up to 5. Anyway, I hope you can kind of get the idea of what I'm doing here. There's another setting that I want to show you about and talk to you about, and that is called the clipping planes. Down here under the clipping planes, we have fog near distance and fog far distance. And the best way to illustrate this is to look at your scene from the side. Based on the light, the light that we are using for the fog is essentially being generated in the middle of your scene at the origin right now. Right now it looks like just a straight line across the entire plane here, just like what we'd had. But one of the things that's happening is that we are defining the distance. I'm going to twirl this up. The fog near distance and the fog far distance. Right now the fog far distance is set to 100. So imagine in the middle of my scene, fog radiating out in a circle, like a big circle out. If I reduce this value, fog far distance, to 20, and I re-render this scene, you'll notice that I have a circle, a semicircle here in my scene. It's being cut off by my height values. So if I actually go back to my simple fog and my maximum height, if I actually increase that to say 50, and render this, you'll see the bubble I'm referring to. Here's this fog bubble, and the negative value, there's a plane down there, so the fog minimum height, negative 50. And if I do that, you can see then those values. So here's this fog bubble. What's interesting is that I can control, of course I'm looking through this fog bubble. When I'm rendering my scene from my cam, I'm looking through the fog. And as I go through the fog, it's getting thicker and thicker because I have to see through more of it. So one of the neat things that you can do, and you can control, and it's easier to see from this, is that I have you won't really notice much if you decrease the fog distance in this particular case. Like if I decrease the far fog distance down to 5, you're not going to see much of a change unless I change like the density or something. However, because I'm looking through it. Here's my camera and I'm looking through the fog bubble. But what you can do, and what is interesting, is that you can adjust the near distance. So currently, you can think about the near distance as how much of that fog is coming out this way, and how from where it's radiated, how far will it radiate from it. So from, let's say it's being generated at the middle of this, how far will it come this way and how far will it go that way? So if I decrease the far distance value, I'm sorry, not how far away it goes. So I'm going to make this like back to 100 the way it was. So it's back to 100. And if I start to change the value of what the near distance is, I always kind of start with tens or so. So if I said near distance of 10, I'm just going to slice this. I might not see much of an action, although things might be changed. So I'm going to go up to 20 and see if I get anything. Notice this. The fog is now at 20. It's rendering 20 units or 20 units far away from there, and it's not calculating any fog in this band. Notice that it's a circle radiating away from behind my camera. So from where I'm calculated, the fog is actually on part of this. So if I reduce this down a little bit more, let's say I'm going to go 16. I want to see how it might wrap across this box. So 16 is a little too much. So I'm going to go 18. I'm going to try to get a little bit of a line across my box here. Almost there. So 18, so 19. Let's go 19.5. There we go. So some of that cube is in the fog and some of it isn't. So if I increase this further, for instance, say 30, it's going to radiate that ring of no fog around farther and farther and farther until I'm going to have fog out here somewhere. So if this is 30, I'm going to double that. I'm going to go about 65. And I can see those values. So there's just a tremendous amount of things that we can do with that. So from where my camera sits, it's calculating a ring of a value of 65 outside before the fog actually starts happening. Now if I increase my blend range to say 55, and maybe I can soften that lower edge a little bit. No, it's not really. Oh, I have a minimum height of 0. So depending on the values, you just have to experiment a little bit. A maximum height is I'm going to go 10. And this value is obviously 20. So I'm not really getting any interesting effects at the moment. Not what I was expecting. I was hoping to blend some of that together, but it wasn't happening. So we've looked at our fog, environment fog, and using some of these values. And I've worked with a lot of them, and remember my saturation values not very far. So anyway, I've messed up some of my settings, and so I'd have to reset things a little bit. So I want you to experiment with these things and see kind of what it is that you're interested in and working on, and seeing how you can use some of these ideas in your artwork to give a sense of depth. And it does take some time to work with things. Sometimes you can change a value and lose what it is that you're doing. I need to go back through then and set things up and set things up again and figure out what setting I did to remove that. And it would just take me a few minutes to put things back together again. And so experimenting with these things, using depth of field, using this idea of environment fog to get a sense of that fogginess in the ground or whatever, to push things off in the distance. They're just really interesting ways to add something more to your scenes that you don't typically see in CG graphics, kind of what we're doing. So I hope that's fun, and have some fun experimenting with it.